The cabin lights glowed softly as the passengers settled into their seats, the hum of the engines blending with quiet conversations and the rustle of seatbelts clicking into place. She sat quietly by the window, her eyes lost in the clouds outside to anyone watching. She looked like any other traveler, calm, polite, and distant. The flight attendants moved down the aisle with practiced smiles, offering drinks and soft blankets, but she declined everything with a gentle nod, preferring silence over small talk. The plane climbed higher, slicing through the clouds. Families began watching movies. A group of college students laughed in the back, and a businessman tapped away on his laptop. Yet amid all the noise and movement, she remained still, almost too still. The woman sitting beside her noticed the faint scar on her hand, a thin white line that looked old and faded, but carried a story. Traveling for work? The woman beside her asked with a smile. She turned, gave a small nod, and replied softly, "Something like that," her tone calm but distant enough to end the conversation. The flight continued smoothly for the first hour. Attendants served meals, children slept, and the pilot's voice occasionally broke the quiet with weather updates. Everything seemed normal, perfectly ordinary, until the first tremor. A sudden jolt ran through the plane, subtle but sharp enough to make everyone look up. The overhead lights flickered for a second and the seatbelt signs came back on. The pilot's voice came through the speakers, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Turbulence wasn't new to her. She had been through worse, much worse. But what caught her attention wasn't the shaking of the plane. It was the sound, a strange grinding noise beneath the floor, mechanical and heavy, not the usual hum of the engines. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She tilted her head, listening carefully while the others around her whispered nervously. A loud thud followed and a tray fell from a passenger's lap. Gas spread like ripples. The plane shuddered again, more violently this time. A child cried out as a drink spilled across the aisle. The woman in the next seat gripped the armrest. Panic rising, the flight attendants hurried to calm everyone, smiling through their own fear. "It's okay. Just a little turbulence," they repeated. But their eyes told a different story. The seatbelt sign blinked again, and the captain's voice came through once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may need to adjust altitude due to unexpected conditions. Please stay calm." His voice trembled slightly at the end. She caught it. That tiny break, that hint of fear behind the practiced tone. She had heard that tone before, back when she used to sit behind radios. Not in passenger seats, her fingers twitched slightly. A habit she thought she had left behind. She looked around. The old couple in front praying softly. The young man behind holding his phone like it was a lifeline. The flight attendant walking by, gripping the seatbacks to steady herself. The shaking grew worse. The plane began to tilt slightly. The cabin lights flickered again and a low, unfamiliar alarm began to beep near the cockpit door. Her calm eyes turned sharp. She unbuckled her belt halfway but stopped when the attendant shouted, "Ma'am, please remain seated." She nodded quickly and sat back, not wanting attention. Not yet. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. Her mind racing with calculations, altitude, engine noise, the pattern of vibrations. She wasn't just guessing, she knew the sounds, the rhythm of a failing system. Suddenly, the plane dropped sharply. Screams erupted across the cabin. Overhead bins popped open and luggage fell into the aisles. The captain's voice returned, but this time it wasn't calm. "We're experiencing technical issues. Please stay seated, flight crew, take your positions." The oxygen masks dropped down, swinging wildly. A baby cried out as the mother tried to fix the mask over its face. The woman beside her grabbed her arm. "What's happening? Are we going to crash?" she asked, trembling. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the cockpit. The door still closed but faintly rattling. She could hear the shouts inside, muffled but urgent. She knew that sound, not confusion but controlled panic. She looked back at the terrified passengers, at the flight attendants who were trying their best to act strong, and something inside her shifted. That calm, detached mask she had worn since boarding began to fade. She knew she couldn't just sit there anymore. Not when the sound of the right engine told her exactly what was coming. The plane jerked again. The cabin lights flickered once more, and a new sound filled the air. The one no passenger ever wants to hear. A sputter followed by silence from one side of the aircraft. Gasps turned to screams. The plane tilted dangerously, and the captain's strained voice shouted through the speakers, "Engine 2 failure, attempting restart." People cried, prayed, and held on to each other, but she sat there gripping her seat, her mind sharp, calculating, remembering procedures long buried under civilian life. She had left that world years ago, traded the cockpit for quiet anonymity. But now, as the aircraft dipped and alarms wailed, every muscle in her body knew what had to be done, because this wasn't the first time she had been in a falling plane. And soon, everyone on board would find out exactly who she really was. The screams still echoed as the plane continued to drop. Trays and bags scattered across the aisle. The lights blinked in flashes, painting faces of fear and confusion. The oxygen masks dangled like ghosts, passengers fumbling to pull them over their faces, but she didn't move for hers. Her hands rested on her knees, calm yet tense. Her mind was already ahead of the chaos, calculating every vibration, every sound. The pilot's voice cracked through the intercom. "Engine 2 has failed. We're attempting manual control. Please stay calm." But the tremor in his voice said otherwise. The left side of the plane shuddered again. Metal groaning under pressure, she closed her eyes. Listening, one engine sputtering, the other straining. Altitude dropping faster than expected, and the smell of burnt oil faint in the recycled air. Her seatmate was crying quietly now, gripping the armrest. "We're going to die, aren't we?" she whispered. She turned, her voice steady but soft. "Not if they act fast." The woman beside her looked confused. "You sound like you've done this before." She didn't reply, only looked toward the cockpit again. A flight attendant stumbled by, her hands shaking as she checked the rows, trying to maintain order. "Please stay seated," she called, but her own mask dangled loose, eyes wide with fear. The woman reached out, caught her arm gently. "What's happening in the cockpit?" she asked firmly. The attendant hesitated, torn between protocol and panic. "The captain said, the engine's gone and the co-pilot's trying to restart it manually." She nodded, her jaw tightening. She knew that tone, desperation wrapped in training. "How long?" she asked. "About 8 minutes since failure," the attendant replied, her voice trembling. She let out a slow breath. 8 minutes too long. That engine wasn't coming back, and she knew it. Her mind flashed back to a dimly lit hangar years ago, her hands covered in grease, instructors yelling over roaring turbines, the smell of fuel thick in the air. Never panic. Never freeze and planes fall because pilots do. She had said those very words to younger cadets once, and now they echoed inside her head like a haunting reminder of the life she'd buried. The aircraft jolted again, alarms screeching in the background, and the pilot's voice shouted something about altitude. The nose dipped lower, the cabin tilted slightly to the right. Passengers cried out. She unclipped her seatbelt this time, ignoring the attendant's frantic, "Ma'am, please sit down." She steadied herself on the armrest and stood, her calmness cutting through the panic like a blade. "Is the cockpit door locked?" she asked. The attendant blinked. Yes, it's automatic." "Then get me to the interphone," she said firmly. The attendant hesitated. "Only crew." "Do it," she said, the authority in her voice making even the panicked attendant pause. The attendant, overwhelmed and desperate, led her toward the galley, where a phone hung near the service station. She picked up the receiver, pressed the code. "Cockpit, this is cabin, respond," static. Then a shaky voice came through. "We're busy, stand by." She paused, then spoke again. "You're losing altitude faster than the engine thrust can handle. Check your hydraulic pressure on the right line." There was a silence, a long, startled silence. The voice came back. "Who is this?" She exhaled slowly. "Someone who's flown your bird before." A few seconds passed. Then a different voice, firmer but strained. "Identify yourself." She closed her eyes briefly. "Former test pilot, Air Defense Program. Serial number." But before she could finish, the pilot cut in. "Impossible. That can't be." "Believe it," she interrupted. "Now listen, your right engine's gone. Stop trying to restart. You're wasting hydraulic power." The silence on the other end told her they were listening now. "Focus on stabilizing your roll and altitude. What's your fuel weight?" she asked. "Half tank," came the quick reply. "Good. Use that to balance your descent," she said, her voice now sharp and commanding, the kind that came from years of training, not fear. Passengers stared at her, wide-eyed, whispering, trying to make sense of who she was. One of the attendants asked quietly, "Who are you?" She didn't look back. "Someone who doesn't want to die today?" The plane steadied slightly. The shaking lessened for a moment, but the danger was far from over. You've got about 5 minutes before you lose altitude control completely, she warned through the line. Find me a headset. Now, she told the attendant within seconds. She was sitting in the jump seat, headset on, speaking calmly to the cockpit, guiding, correcting, commanding. The passengers watched in stunned silence, no longer seeing her as just another traveler. Outside, lightning flashed across the clouds, the aircraft slicing through turbulence like a wounded bird fighting gravity. The pilot's voice came through again. Calmer this time. Ma'am, whoever you are, keep talking. And she did, her tone steady, professional, a leader's voice rising from years of buried silence. Because when the world falls from the sky, there are only two kinds of people, those who scream and those who fly, and she had never forgotten how to fly. The storm outside roared like a beast, lightning flashing across the clouds as the plane fought against violent winds. Inside the cabin, the chaos had turned into tense silence. Passengers clutched hands, whispered prayers, and watched the woman at the jump seat speaking through the headset. Her calm tone cut through the static-filled cabin like a lifeline. Stabilize your roll, reduce pitch by 2 degrees, she instructed. Her voice steady, precise. Copy that, the pilot replied, his voice no longer trembling but focused. Following her commands like a student before a teacher, she adjusted her headset, eyes locked on the flickering light above, listening to every change in the engine's sound. The flight attendants stood frozen, one holding onto the service cart for balance, the other watching her with disbelief. A few passengers whispered among themselves, "Who is she? Is she part of the crew?" someone asked. But the truth was louder than any rumor. She wasn't a flight attendant, and she wasn't supposed to be in command. She took a deep breath and spoke again into the headset. "You've got lateral imbalance, your rudder's dragging left. Compensate manually. Our hydraulics are sluggish," came the captain's voice. "Then reroute through auxiliary. Don't wait for the system to fix itself," she replied instantly. The cockpit went quiet for a moment, then a quick copy came through. Her voice was different now, firm, rhythmic, trained. She wasn't just giving instructions, she was flying with them. Every word a move in the invisible dance of survival. "Altitude?" She asked. 17,000 dropping, the pilot said. "Bring it to 15, hold there, use your flaps manually," she commanded. Passengers began to calm slightly as the violent shaking eased. The plane still trembled, but it was no longer plummeting. A man in the third row leaned over and whispered to his wife, "She's saving us, whoever she is." The woman just nodded, tears in her eyes, watching the stranger who had turned fear into direction. Inside the cockpit, the pilots worked like soldiers under fire. "Following every word, ma'am." "We've rerouted hydraulics," said the co-pilot. "Good," she replied. "Now tell me your nearest alternate landing zone." "We were headed toward Paris." "Closest alternate is Zurich," the captain answered. "That's too far with one engine unstable," she replied. "Find me something closer. Give me your coordinates." The co-pilot read them out, and she scribbled quick notes on the back of a paper napkin. Her handwriting fast, sharp, filled with numbers and short commands. "Divert to Stuttgart," she said after a moment. "Weather windows opening there." "I checked the system earlier." The captain hesitated. "That's not our designated alternate. It's your only safe one," she said firmly. "And you know it." The line went silent, then a short reply came. "Copy. Diverting to Stuttgart." The woman sitting nearest to her leaned forward slightly. You sound like you've done this before," she said softly. She gave a faint, distant smile. "Once upon a time," was all she said. Her eyes returned to the headset. But her mind wasn't here. It was back in the days when she wore a uniform, when her call sign wasn't a secret, when her voice had once guided pilots through war zones, not passengers through fear. The plane hit another pocket of turbulence, throwing cups and magazines into the air, but she stayed seated, one hand gripping the console, the other on the headset. "Stay calm, small pitch adjustments. Don't overcompensate," she warned the pilots. They obeyed, steadying the descent once more. Her eyes darted to the left wing through the window. She could see sparks, faint but real. Near the damaged engine, she clenched her jaw. "You've got a small fire on engine 2, she reported. "Activate the extinguisher system now." "Already did." "It's holding," came the captain's voice. "Good. Keep it isolated and start descent toward 7,000 feet. We'll prepare for an emergency landing approach." The words emergency landing made passengers gasp, but her calm voice followed right after. "It's just a procedure, we're fine. We're flying steady." The tone of confidence from her voice settled hearts like a blanket. People stopped crying and started breathing again. Minutes passed like hours. Every second heavy with tension, she coordinated quietly. Her commands crisp and controlled. "Wind direction?" she asked. 260 west. "Then approach from east, headwinds better for your glide." The co-pilot exhaled loudly. "Ma'am, you sound like command." She smiled faintly, though no one could see it. "Maybe I used to be." As the plane broke through the thick clouds, city lights shimmered below, and a sign of land, of hope. Passengers began to cry softly, holding hands, whispering thanks. She removed the headset for a second, rubbing her temple. The weight of responsibility heavy but familiar. The pilot's voice came through again, softer now. "Whoever you are, I hope command knows what they lost when you left." She looked out the window at the stars fading above the horizon and said quietly, "Command didn't lose me. I just stopped flying until tonight." The storm cleared slowly, and with every passing mile, the passengers' fear turned into something else. Awe, for they were no longer just passengers on a failing flight. They were witnesses to the quiet return of someone who had once ruled the skies, and now once again was saving lives from 30,000 feet in the air. The glow of the city lights below looked close enough to touch, but the truth was far from comforting. The aircraft was descending, yes, but not smoothly. The remaining engine coughed and strained like a wounded beast, its rhythm uneven. The passengers could feel it, the slow vibration under their feet, the uncertain hum of power that could vanish at any moment. She sat with her headset pressed tight, eyes fixed on the instrument readings projected on the small cabin screen nearby. "Maintain glide slope," she instructed sharply. "Do not overcorrect pitch. Keep your descent stable." Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone that could turn chaos into control. "Copy that," the pilot replied, his breathing heavy but controlled now. The cockpit had become a zone of obedience. Her voice, "Their compass. Altitude 11,000, the co-pilot reported. Keep it steady, no sudden banking, and watch your wind drift." "It's picking up from starboard side," she reminded. A sudden crack of thunder split the air outside, lightning flashing across the left wing, illuminating the streaks of rain that had begun to hit the window. Passengers screamed again as the plane jolted violently. Luggage tumbled down from the open compartments. A child cried out for his mother, who was already clutching him tightly, whispering that everything would be okay. Through the panic, her voice came again, strong and unshaken. "Everyone, stay seated. We're stabilizing. We are under control." Her words were slow, firm, meant not just for the pilots, but for every terrified soul in that cabin. And somehow those words worked like a shield. A flight attendant crouched near her, gripping a seat for balance. "Ma'am, the passengers in the back are panicking. Some won't wear their masks." "Then tell them this," she replied, lowering her voice. "The person speaking on this line used to teach pilots how to land with no engines at all. They'll listen." The attendant's eyes widened. She nodded quickly, rushing down the aisle to spread the message. A murmur spread across the cabin, disbelief first, then awe. People looked at her with new eyes, not as a passenger but as something more, someone who carried authority in her very stillness. Back on the headset, the captain's voice came through again. "We've got a crosswind, 30 knots, runway approach looks rough," she responded instantly. "Stay with it. Reduce throttle on the left engine to 70%, and keep the flaps at 25 degrees. Too much drag will stall you." The co-pilot muttered something under his breath. "Who trained you, ma'am?" She gave a short laugh, dry, humorless. "The same people who trained you, only they stopped calling me when they needed someone to fix their messes." The cockpit went silent for a few seconds. Then came the pilot's quiet reply, "Well, tonight, we're lucky you're here." The cabin lights flickered again, and the smell of burning insulation filled the air. She frowned. "You've got an electrical short near the auxiliary power. Cut the feed now or it'll spread." "Already on it," came the captain's quick response. The plane groaned as it dropped another 1,000 feet, and out of the window, the runway lights appeared, faint, glimmering in the rain, a thin line of hope against the dark storm clouds. The passengers gasped at the sight, tears of fear turning into tears of relief. She gripped the intercom tightly. "All right, listen carefully," she told the cockpit, her tone sharp now. "All hesitation gone. You'll come in at a shallow descent. No flaps past 25. Gear down late to avoid drag. Use what power you've got left on the left engine and don't cut until touchdown. You cut early, you drop. Understood, the pilot said. We're aligned with the approach. Good, keep it smooth. Don't fight the wind and flow with it, she reminded. Then she turned to the cabin, removing her headset for a moment, and stood up. Steady despite the shaking floor. Everyone listen to me, she said loudly, her voice carrying through the cabin. We're making a safe landing. You need to stay calm and listen to the crew. Keep your seatbelts tight, stay low when we touch down, and follow instructions. No panic, no rushing. Her words felt like command. Not comfort, but it was what they needed. People nodded, gripping the seats tighter. Parents held their children close, and even the loudest sobs turned into quiet prayers. She put her headset back on. You're clear for final descent, she said. Bring her home, the pilot's voice came back. Soft but firm. Roger that. The nose dipped gently. The wings leveled, and the runway lights grew larger, brighter, closer. The storm howled outside, wind battering against the fuselage. But the plane held steady, guided not by luck, but by the voice of a woman who refused to let fear take control. At 700 feet, the right engine coughed again, alarms blaring. Engine 1's dropping power, shouted the co-pilot. Ignore it, she commanded. Keep your nose straight, glider down. Gravity's your ally now. The tires were visible now, faint shadows against the rain. Gear down, she ordered, and the heavy clunk of landing gear lowering filled the cabin. The pilot's voice trembled slightly. Here we go. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, whispering softly, You've got this. Then, in the next second, the cabin filled with the deafening sound of wind, rain, and hope colliding. The final moments before impact, and somewhere between fear and faith, the passengers realized they weren't falling anymore. They were being guided by a stranger who wasn't just a passenger, but someone who had once danced with danger thousands of times, and always landed home. The plane broke through the last wall of storm clouds like a wounded bird fighting for its life. The runway lights stretched ahead, a glittering path through the rain-soaked darkness. The control tower's voice crackled faintly in the captain's ear, giving clearance, but all focus remained on the calm, precise tone guiding them from the jump seat. Steady descent, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a command carved in steel. Keep your nose level, power left engine at 60, no sudden corrections, and don't let the wind scare you. Roger that, replied the captain, his voice trembling slightly but steadying with every word she spoke. The cabin was a world of held breaths. Every passenger had their seatbelt tight, heads lowered, eyes wide, some whispered prayers, some held hands, others simply stared at her. The stranger who had turned panic into purpose. The landing gear was down, the plane's nose aligned, but the crosswind pushed hard from the west, shaking the aircraft like a toy. Wind shear, muttered the co-pilot. We're losing lift. No, she said instantly. You're losing confidence, not lift. Hold your line. Correct, left 2 degrees, ride the gust, don't fight it. Her voice had the kind of authority that came from years of living inside the storm, not reading about it. The captain's hands gripped the yoke tighter, following her words like gospel, and slowly the aircraft began to steady. Altitude 1000, came the call. Good, keep the descent smooth. Flaps stable, she said. You're doing fine. Don't rush it. In the cabin, a baby began to cry again, and a woman whispered, Please let us make it. Another passenger whispered back. She'll get us down. You'll see. The rain outside beat harder against the fuselage, lightning flashing in the distance, illuminating her face for a brief second. Calm, focused, eyes burning with quiet intensity. She wasn't just helping them land. She was reliving something she thought she'd left behind. Her mind flashed to another flight years ago, one that never made the news. A secret mission over rough mountains. Engines failing, a co-pilot barely conscious. She'd brought that plane down safely too, but it had cost her everything. Her license, her peace, her will to fly, and now, sitting in seat 9C of a commercial jet, destiny had dragged her back into the sky to do it again. Speed? She asked. 140, came the reply. Bring it down to 130, you're too fast for this approach. Copy, the captain said. Gently easing back, the lights of the airport grew brighter. Reflecting on the wet tarmac below, she glanced back at the passengers, the silent, trembling sea of faces, people who had boarded thinking they were flying to vacation, to meetings, to reunions, and now clung to their lives in the hands of a woman who hadn't even introduced herself. The co-pilot's voice broke her thoughts. Crosswind increasing 28 knots. She nodded. Good. Angle into it slightly, keep your wings balanced. And listen. When you touch down, don't slam the brakes, let her roll. Friction will do half the work. The pilot hesitated. Are you sure? She smiled faintly. If I wasn't sure, we'd already be on the ground the wrong way. 700 feet. The runway filled the windshield, slick and shining like a mirror under the rain. The wipers swished uselessly against the downpour. Flare in 5 seconds, she said quietly. 4, 3, 2. Hold, now. The plane eased forward, then dropped. The tires screamed against the wet asphalt, sparks flying as they made contact. The jolt threw everyone forward. But it wasn't violent, it was real. Grounding, reverse thrust gently, she commanded. Don't kill the engine yet. Copy. The noise was deafening, the vibration intense. Yet the plane stayed straight, skidding slightly but holding its line. The cabin filled with shouts and cries, not of fear, but of hope. Of disbelief that they were touching the earth again. The plane slowed, inch by inch, second by second. Until the shaking stopped, the engines wound down. A heavy silence filled the cabin, followed by the soft, shaky sound of people crying, the sound of relief, of life. The captain's voice finally came through the speakers, weak but smiling. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to solid ground. A roar of applause and sobs filled the air, but she didn't move. She sat still, headset off now, eyes closed, breathing slowly, letting the adrenaline fade. Her hands trembled for the first time since the ordeal began, not from fear but from remembering. The attendant approached her, voice trembling. Ma'am, who are you? She looked up, her gaze steady. Just someone who used to fly, she said softly, as paramedics and ground crew rushed toward the plane. The captain's voice called through the intercom again. To the woman in seat 9C, the cockpit owes you everything. The passengers turned, dozens of eyes landing on her, but she simply smiled faintly, looked out the rain-smeared window, and whispered to herself, once a pilot, always a pilot. Outside, sirens blared, the rain poured harder. But inside that cabin, for the first time in what felt like forever, every single heart beat with gratitude. And for her, the sky that had once taken everything from her had just given something back. The emergency lights glowed faintly across the cabin, casting long shadows on faces still wet with tears. The plane had stopped moving, the engines were silent, yet the echo of fear still clung to the air. Passengers looked around, dazed, unable to believe they were still alive. A few began to clap, hesitantly at first, then louder, until the sound filled the entire cabin, a thunder of gratitude that drowned out the rain outside. But she didn't stand to take any credit. She remained in her seat, headset resting on her lap, staring blankly at the dark window beside her. The reflection staring back wasn't the same calm stranger who had boarded hours ago. Her eyes looked older now, not from age, but from remembering. The captain stepped out of the cockpit, sweat still on his forehead, his hands trembling slightly. When he saw her, he paused mid-step as if unsure how to approach. You, he said softly, almost in disbelief. You saved this aircraft. She looked up slowly, her tone quiet but firm. We all did. No, the co-pilot said, joining him. Without you, we wouldn't have made it through that descent. I've never heard anyone command like that before. Not even in training. She gave a faint, tired smile. Old habits don't fade easily. Passengers nearby leaned in, whispering, who is she? Was she part of the military? Why was she sitting back here? The murmurs grew louder, spreading through the cabin like ripples. But she didn't answer anyone. Instead, she reached for her small travel bag under the seat, her movements slow and deliberate, as if every motion carried a weight she didn't want to show. A flight attendant approached. Ma'am, the ground crew wants to meet you. The tower said your guidance was recorded on open comms. They want to thank you personally. She shook her head gently. Tell them the crew deserves it more, not me. The attendant frowned. But please, she interrupted softly, just let me go quietly. Outside, flashing lights from emergency vehicles painted the rain-slicked tarmac red and blue. Medics helped passengers down the stairs one by one, wrapping blankets around them. The air smelled of jet fuel and wet metal, yet every breath felt like a gift. As she stepped into the aisle, the entire row of passengers beside her turned and started clapping again. Not the nervous applause from before, but something real, emotional, raw. She froze, caught off guard. "Thank you." Someone shouted, "You saved our lives!" cried another. Her throat tightened. Words refused to come. She nodded slightly, trying to smile. But her eyes betrayed her, glistening with tears she hadn't shed in years. The captain followed her toward the exit. "At least tell me your name," he said quietly. "I need to know who brought us down tonight." She hesitated. Standing near the doorway, the cool air from outside brushing her face. "Names don't matter," she said softly. "But tell your tower." "Tell them Falcon handled it," the captain blinked, stunned. "Falcon?" he repeated. "That call sign hasn't been active for—" She cut him off gently. "I know. Some birds just learn to fly again when they have to." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the rain hammering against the metal stairs. The captain finally exhaled, shaking his head in awe. "Falcon, I heard about you. They said you walked away from flying after that mountain descent years ago." "Maybe I did," she said. "But the sky doesn't forget its own." She stepped down onto the runway, rain soaking through her jacket instantly, but she didn't care. Each drop felt like something washing away, fear, regret. The silence of years spent pretending she was just another face in the crowd. Behind her, the passengers continued to file out, some stopping to touch her arm, whispering thank you with trembling voices. A child waved from the stairs, holding a small toy airplane. "You're a hero," he shouted. She smiled for the first time that night. A real smile. "No, little one," she whispered. "Just a pilot who never stopped flying." The ground crew waited near the ambulance line, waving her over, but she turned the other way, walking slowly across the tarmac toward the service gate, her steps steady, deliberate, disappearing into the misty rain. The co-pilot watched her from the doorway, still trying to process what had happened. "She just walked away," he said quietly. The captain nodded, still staring at the empty runway. "That's what legends do," he murmured in the control tower. One of the operators replayed the final minutes of the flight. The recordings captured her voice, calm, unwavering, commanding, guiding the crippled aircraft through chaos. When the file saved, the operator labeled it automatically. The system asked for a name, and he typed, "Falcon Return." And somewhere out in the darkness, as the storm finally began to fade, she walked toward the terminal lights with quiet footsteps, knowing that for the first time in years, she hadn't just landed a plane, she had landed herself. Dawn broke over the airfield like a quiet promise. The storm clouds were gone, leaving behind a pale golden sky and the faint smell of rain on metal. The runway shimmered under the first light, a mirror to the night's chaos. Emergency vehicles stood still now, their sirens silenced, their flashing lights replaced by the calm hum of morning. The passengers, wrapped in blankets, sat together on the terminal benches. Their faces were pale, eyes tired, yet filled with gratitude. Some were calling loved ones. Others were too shaken to speak. Every now and then, someone looked toward the window, toward the plane that had nearly fallen from the sky, and whispered thanks under their breath. But she wasn't there among them. She had vanished quietly, slipping away before anyone could stop her. Not for fame, not for credit. She had never been the kind of person who stayed for applause. The tower recorded her voice. The captain spoke her name, Falcon. Yet no one could find her in the passenger list. She hadn't even used her real name when booking the ticket. The captain sat inside the debrief room, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The co-pilot paced restlessly. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. "That voice, that control, she took over like she'd never left the cockpit." The captain nodded slowly. "You don't forget training like that, especially if it once defined who you were." Outside the glass walls, the damaged aircraft sat in the maintenance bay, engineers inspecting its burnt right engine. One of them shook his head in disbelief. "This thing shouldn't have landed at all," he said. "Whoever guided them down, they did the impossible." In the far corner of the terminal, near the quiet exit gate, a woman in a dark jacket stood by a vending machine, her hair still damp. She took a sip from a small paper cup of tea, eyes fixed on the glowing horizon beyond the runway. Her expression was calm, but inside she was still hearing it all. The alarms, the shouts, the trembling of metal fighting the wind. For a long time, she had convinced herself that her flying days were over, that the sky had taken too much from her. The comrades she lost, the sleepless nights, the weight of decisions no one else could make. But now, after years of silence, it had called her back, not through orders, Not through duty, but through chance, through fate. She looked down at her phone, still in airplane mode. Dozens of missed calls appearing as she turned it on. Old contacts, forgotten names. Some of them from the defense board. Others from people who hadn't spoken to her since she walked away. The world, it seemed, had already started whispering again. Falcon is back. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the young flight attendant from the night before, eyes red from exhaustion, holding a small envelope. "The captain asked me to find you," she said, handing it over. "He said it's not official, but he wanted you to have this." Inside the envelope was a single note written on flight paper, stained slightly from water. "For every pilot who thought they'd lost their wings, thank you for proving the sky still remembers." Beneath it, the captain had signed only one word, unrespectfully. She smiled faintly, folded the note, and slipped it into her pocket. "Tell him I'm grateful," she said. The attendant nodded, hesitating for a moment before whispering, "You're a hero." Her eyes softened. "No," she replied quietly. "I just did what any pilot would do if they still remembered how to listen. Not to fear, but to instinct." She turned to leave, her steps slow but steady. The attendant called after her, "Will you ever fly again?" She stopped for a moment, looked out the window at the horizon glowing gold. "I think I already did," she said, and walked away. By the time the sun had fully risen, her trail was gone. The tower couldn't trace her. The passengers only knew her as the woman who saved us, and the airline's official report simply called her an unidentified skilled individual who provided critical technical assistance. But among the pilots who heard the story, it spread like wildfire. In hangars, in training rooms, in airbase corridors, they whispered about her, about Falcon, the forgotten test pilot who had once vanished from the records and then returned from the shadows when the sky was falling. Weeks later, one of the tower operators opened a small parcel with no sender listed. Inside was a silver pin, the kind worn by flight instructors years ago, engraved with only 3 words, "Still flying free." No one ever saw her again after that night. But sometimes, when storms gathered over the same airfield, the crew claimed they could hear a calm voice over the emergency frequency, faint but familiar, saying, "Hold your line, trust your wings." And whether it was memory, myth, or something greater, one truth remained. She had been just a passenger when she boarded, but by the time the plane touched the ground, she reminded the world that some people aren't meant to watch the sky. They're meant to command it, even from the shadows. Forever known only by the name that once ruled the clouds, Falcon,